Hi, how you doing? So this is the first video on relationships, and I have no idea how many parts there are going to be by the time it's all said and done, but this is part one. So it's going to be fairly brief because it's going to be a general overview of what is a relationship. And a lot of people think, well, we know what a relationship is. And although this focus is mostly on romantic relationships, we're also going to kind of show you how it expands to all your relationships. So what is a relationship? A relationship is simply how we relate to something else. And it's key that you remember that, because a relationship is not an entity, and we'll get to that. A relationship in general is how we relate to something else or someone else. We have a relationship with everything around us. Right now, actually, between you and I, we have a relationship. I'm doing these videos for you to see and hopefully learn. You're responding to them, whether it's positively or negatively, and that's how we relate. You're relating to me, even though it's through video. We have a relationship with the earth, with nature. And this is something, if you look on the ground anymore, you'll realize that that's something that people kind of take for granted, that relationship with the earth, that we litter and we destroy and we pollute and it's quite awful. But that's our relationship with the earth. That's how we relate to the earth. Now when it comes to people, there's all sorts of different types of relationships. There's friendships and coworkers, as I mentioned before, and then you've got romantic relationships, which is what most people want me to talk about. So that's what we'll focus on. As I just got done saying, a relationship is not an entity. It's simply two people who are trying to relate to one another. When you do something, how do I relate to that? When I do something, how do you relate to that? How is our interpersonal communications? How do we react and respond? These are the parts of a relationship, but it is not an entity. And people, well, what do you mean? Most people, and I'm sure either you said it or you've heard somebody that you said it, they're talking about the relationship as if it's an entity of itself. Well, the relationship. Well, what about the relationship? Well, that's going to put a big strain on the relationship. And if you make your relationships, and for the purposes of our talk right now, romantic relationships, if you create this entity, this false entity that doesn't exist, you're already putting pressure on how you relate to somebody else. Because now that person has to hold up and build this entity that's not there. And so do you see, when that entity really isn't there. So when you say, well, you know what you're doing right now is hurting our relationship. That's a lot to put on somebody. Because the relationship is not there. It is not an entity. You cannot reach out and touch it. It's going by title alone. And remember, humans have to name things in order to understand them. But we've created this to make a relationship something. And it's not. It is no thing. There is no thing that is a relationship. You can't buy it at a store. You can't find it in a catalog. You can't touch it. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. It is not an entity. It's simply how we relate to each other. And when you start getting the basis of that, and this will be the basis of all the other videos to follow on relationships, when you understand the basics of that, it simplifies things. Because that pressure is now off to protect something and keep something together that's not there, doesn't exist. So how do we then turn that back around? Well, it's how we relate to each other. And then once you realize that this entity called a relationship doesn't exist, you can understand that it gets put on you. How I relate to you is going to affect our relationship. And how you relate to me is what's going to affect our relationship. Now you're putting control in the parties at hand. So if you do something, how I relate to that is going to cause my response. And you see this in so many different ways. You'll see one relationship with somebody that works a lot, and the other person always gets upset. And you'll see another relationship with the exact same scenario, but the other person doesn't get upset. Well, why is that? It's because they are relating to each other, and that circumstance is different. Now, why is it important to think that way? Because in the midst of a relationship, if you're fighting about something, if you're having problems with something, you can simply slow down and say, what about me can make this better? What about me is feeling this way? And you look inside yourself to find out some answers, because that's all we have control over. We don't have control over the other person, how they respond to us, how they react to us, or their actions. It's solely within us how we relate back to that person or that circumstance. So when you start saying, okay, there is no such thing as a relationship, now I'm going to take personal control over my part of it, how I relate. Now you can start bringing in the answer, or bringing in the questions that will lead you to the answers. What about me can make this better? What about me is feeling this way? You're going to hear a cat in the background here in a second. One of two. So ultimately, get the idea of a relationship being an entity out of your head. Once we do that, we can start focusing on how we relate to each other. And you can practice very easily by just sitting and observing how you relate to a friend, how you relate to a coworker, how you relate to the person at the grocery store. Grocery store is always wonderful. I always love this story because you see them, and this happened to me this morning actually. She's scanning the items. Good morning, how are you? Good morning, how are you? And most people go, oh, I'm all right. Oh, I'm all right. And then I walk up in line, and without looking up, she says, good morning, how are you? And I said, I'm awesome, thank you. How are you doing? And she stopped, and she looked up, and I was smiling. And she goes, I'm good, thank you. And it changed because I related to her in a different way than other people did. I made that a good situation, which is what you can do in romantic situations. And the funny thing is, I took my groceries and I was walking away. I heard her with a totally different voice ask the next person, hi, good morning, how are you doing today? We related something back and forth to each other with a complete stranger in a matter of moments. That kind of, I don't want to use the word power, but that's the power that you have inside of yourself. Once you realize that it is not an entity, there is no relationship as a thing between myself and that cashier. It's just me relating to her and her day, and her relating back to me. Once we realize that, we can start overcoming those obstacles. And again, all those videos are coming. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to post a comment or email me. And again, please subscribe to the channel. It will let you know when the new videos come out. And I appreciate you watching as always. Have a great day.